unlike Revit, where like it's literally the software that's handcuffing you and making you think in certain ways. Whereas ArchiCAD, yeah, it's like I can do it however I want. I can build an object out of a morph. I can build it out of a roof. I can build it out of a wall, a floor. Like I can do like whatever I want. I can imagine whatever world I want and create it pretty easily.
This is Inside the Apple Studio, the podcast that details the intersection of architecture and Apple and explores how architects and other design professionals use Apple products in the practice of architecture. With your host, architect Neil Pam. Support for Inside the Apple Studio comes from Monograph. Monograph is the cloud-based practice operations solution built for architects by architects. Learn how Monograph can help you be more productive at monograph.com. Inside the Apple Studio is also supported by Arc IT. Arc IT is an IT provider that specializes in serving Mac and PC-based architecture and design firms. For a free consultation, go to getarcit.com. Welcome to Inside the Apple Studio. I'm excited to have an architect that sees the world differently than most and brings an alternative perspective to how he practices architecture. I'm pleased to welcome David Clayton to the show. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Neil.
Well, let's start our conversation with having you talk about how you see the world differently and how that gives you an alternative perspective on practicing architecture.
Yeah, so I'm sure you're referring to the name of my YouTube channel, The Colorblind Architect, and I am actually colorblind. I've always been colorblind, and it's not like a severe color blindness. It's like I can still see colors. It's just as my wife will attest, I definitely don't see colors the way everybody else does because like when we first got married, I was driving a silver Honda Passport at the time. This was back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I kept on calling it a blue. And she would just laugh at me and be like, dude, it's like silver. I'm like, it is? Well, over time, I would, and obviously those little color dot tests, I would always fail those anytime I took those in school when I was younger. And so I kind of knew that I was colorblind. It's just, I didn't want to admit it. And then, as time moved on, I eventually just kind of settled into the fact that, this is just who I am. This is just the way I see the world. And I'm not going to trust myself to pick your interior design palette. I'm going to hire an interior designer for you. Or if maybe I really need to choose the colors, I will say to my wife, hey, here are the colors I'm thinking of. Can you check it against this?
Right.
And she'll just confirm like, oh, okay, yeah, those look terrible. Usually I'm pretty bad. So typically I'll wear a lot of grays and blacks. It's not just because I'm an architect. I know that wearing black shirts is kind of like the unofficial architect uniform, but no, I do it because I just typically don't like to trust myself with color. But I actually do love color. So the reason why I started the YouTube video, though, that was kind of a reaction of sorts. I mean, I had been wanting to do some kind of YouTube or podcast presentation for a long time, and I just never really had a reason to, or like didn't really have a good handle on it. And then, especially after the George Floyd incident happened, there was a ton of talk about race relations, and there was a lot of people talking about how we can no longer be colorblind. And there was a part of me that's like, no, I feel like I need to speak out and say, no, it's okay to be colorblind. It's more important to see the character of the individual. That's always been my mantra is I don't care where you're from, like what race you are, what religion you are. I don't care if you're straight or gay. Like, I don't want to get into that. I want to know, what's your character like? Who are you? Who are you as a person? I want to know your backstory. Like when I'm working with a client, I mean, I've had clients of every race, every, um, every religion. I've worked with Muslims, I've worked with gay people, I've worked with Asians, I've worked with whites, I've worked with blacks. I mean, to me, it doesn't really matter, right?
Hmm.
And so the name colorblind architect was largely a response to the fact that I am actually colorblind, but also that's my philosophy, is that I don't want to look at the surface characteristics of somebody. I want to get to know them as a person.
Sure. Yeah.
And and to a certain extent, that's also how I see architecture. I I I don't get caught up with the styles.
Hmm.
That's something that always bothered me, how a lot of people would be just so obsessed with, oh, it needs to be, we need to make it modern, or we need to make it traditional style, or like there's people that have these really strong opinions about style. And to me, I've always thought that's just the surface treatment. The guts of the building, the actual flow, the way that the way the spaces interact with each other, the experience that the occupant has as they walk through a building, as they inhabit a building,
Hmm.
that to me is far more important than what lick and stick brick is attached to the building.
Yeah.
And so it, I, and so I guess in a way, yeah, the colorblind architect philosophy of mine that's kind of developed over the years, and it's still developing, obviously, is kind of that I care more about what's the core essential um, properties, and
Yeah.
not just the surface characteristics.
The experience of the architecture.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, let's go back a little bit and talk a little bit about what inspired you to become an architect in the first place.
Uh, I mean, I know this is cliche, but Legos. No, just kidding. Um, I mean, obviously, I played with Legos a lot as a kid, but no, I remember. I remember really, really clearly. I was about 5 years old the first time I remember drawing floor plans.
Mhm.
I was always fascinated with anything construction. My mom would actually she actually still tells the story of, like, when I was 4 or 5 years old, and a neighbor across the street had rented a piece of equipment, a caterpillar machine, like a backhoe, and they were doing work in their front yard. And she said that I sat there the entire day on the street curb, just watching my neighbor across the street.
Wow.
I didn't even get up for food. And, I don't remember that specific experience, because I guess I was too young for that. But I do remember, as young as 5, drawing up floor plans of, like, oh, this is how I want my future house to be. And, like, it'd be drawing, oh, here's the bedroom, here's the kitchen, and stuff like that. And so a couple years later, my dad got me a copy of AutoCAD LT.
Uh-huh.
My dad was big into computers. He's actually he did computer repair,
Okay.
and so um, I always had a computer in the home. As young as 3, it was an 8086,
Okay.
an IBM, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, he would. So he got me that, and I would play around with it, and I would basically draw floor plans. Like, that was like my video game. That's what I really enjoyed doing. And
Inspired by
so,
the Legos as
yeah, and
well.
and then obviously I would build a lot with Legos, and yeah, it was just, that was my world. Blocks and Legos and AutoCAD. So
Now, did you continue that into high school, like taking some drafting classes and things?
I did. I took a drafting class in high school, and I was actually, I think it was actually one of the last years at my high school where they were allowing, well, where they were still teaching the drafting by hand.
Okay.
So I consider myself extremely lucky that I was trained in drafting in high school to actually use the pencil with the parallel bar, the triangles, all that stuff.
Uh-huh.
And, I think that really helps me, especially when translating to the computer and understanding like the deeper geometry that's within, and
Hmm.
not just, I think CAD makes it a little bit too easy.
Talk about that a little bit. Too easy in what way?
Um, just that you can make all kinds of shapes with AutoCAD pretty easily. You don't necessarily have to follow any geometric rules. Whereas if you're drafting with a parallel bar and triangles, um, it really forces you to construct the geometry from using geometric rules, right? You can't just draw a circle. You have to actually use the compass, right? Or if
Right.
you want to do an ellipse, you have to actually construct the ellipse from the you know the 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 different lines and the
The focus points and the
yeah,
angles and all
exactly,
that.
right.
Right.
I mean, it's been a while, so probably couldn't remember to do it right now if I had
Yeah.
to, but you know what I mean. It's like you can't just grab the ellipse tool and you know click 2 points like you can in AutoCAD.
Yeah.
So that's basically what I mean by that.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, actually. I think there's a certain tie to the process that you go through when you're drafting by hand. And and maybe it's a little bit slower, maybe a different thought process.
Hmm.
I don't know. Maybe, there's probably lots of people that argue against that, I guess, but
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I still, especially early on in a project, I'll do some sketches on paper. It's not the same thing as drafting, but I think there's there's something beautiful about being able to hold a pencil in your hand and draw on a piece of paper.
mhm.
Um, Ideas flow in a different way than they do when you're on a computer.
Yeah, I'd agree
And I
with
think
that.
and I think you still need both, though. You can't live in just one world. You have to live in both worlds, because the difference in the way your mind processes the information and activates different parts of your brain, um, it creates different levels of creativity, different types of creativity that then informs you as you're creating a design.
Yeah. Yeah. They're each different tools and they each have their uses.
Yeah.
After high school, you went on to get a master's in architecture at Virginia Tech. What drew you to Virginia Tech?
Well, I had been wanting to go to Virginia Tech for a long time. I had visited Virginia Tech in high school as part of my college tour, and gosh darn it, they didn't accept me.
Oh, no.
Not my freshman year. So I actually ended up going to BYU. I grew up a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and
Hmm.
my mom was really insistent. You got to at least apply. And I
Okay.
was so frustrated by it, because I was like, no, no, I don't want to go to freaking Utah. I mean, it's like all Mormony there. I don't like religion and stuff, because I'm a teenager, right?
Sure.
And then she's like, well, you do realize they have really great skiing. I'm like, what? Because this, you got to remember, this was back before YouTube, back when
Yeah.
this was in the '90s. It's like you had to look at an encyclopedia to look up information, right? So I had no clue what Utah was like. I mean, in my mind, I was picturing Iowa. So,
Shout
and
out to
so,
our Iowa listeners. It's okay.
yeah, there's nothing wrong with Iowa. It's really flat and boring. So,
Okay. Send your emails to David Clayton. Thank you very much.
and a lot of mosquitoes. I just remember driving through Iowa in the summertime in a Penske truck with no air conditioning when we moved back to Utah after Virginia Tech, and yeah, it was just a miserable experience, that part of the drive.
Okay.
So so no offense to anybody in Iowa, just it was just a bad experience in a Penske truck. So,
Okay.
but anyways, so she tells me about the skiing, and of course, I was I loved to ski. I mean, I started when I was 12, going skiing in West Virginia. Um, that's where we would usually go skiing. And so she convinces me to at least go out and have a try. I went to Alta Ski Resort, fell in love with the skiing up here in Utah. And I was like, okay, I'll go to BYU. So it was a good thing I did, because when I got back from my mission, for the church, because
Yeah.
I served a mission to the Philippines.
Okay.
And when I got back, I met my wife,
Okay.
and it worked out great. Um, so then, after I finished up my bachelor's, I still wanted to go to Virginia Tech. So I applied and waited and waited and waited. No response.
Oh no.
Eventually, it's like already May, right before the fall semester.
Hmm.
And I'm like freaking out, because I was thinking there should at least be like a denial letter.
Yeah.
So I actually called them up. Turns out they had screwed up, and the application was stuck in between the architecture school and the graduate school, and it was just like it got misplaced.
Oh no.
So the dean actually looked at my application and calls me up the very next day and said, "You're accepted."
Oh, that's great.
And I was like, I was like on cloud nine, of course, because I'm like, dream come true. I go to the
Yeah.
school that I really wanted to go to, and it was absolutely, um, 3 years of the best education I've had in my life. I really appreciated the professors there at Virginia Tech, especially that dean. Hans Rote was his name.
Okay.
Uh, I, 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 I haven't checked in to see if how he's doing since, but because the last time I saw him was in 2007. But man, just a really, really good guy. Looks. My wife jokes and uh, calls him the Austrian Santa Claus, because he was like this older guy with like the beard, and like all, a little bit tubby, and just,
Yeah.
has this demeanor looking like he's really sweet, but he's actually a real hard ass. um, so, but yeah, he was a great professor to learn from, and there were several others that I really greatly enjoyed. Um, got deep into different philosophies, different theories of architecture, and it was great. I mean, and it was funny, because I always felt like I was, you know not as good as some of the other students. I always
Hmm.
felt like I was having to, up my game to improve the level of quality, and I think it was something that really helped me become a better person and a better architect as a result of being in such an elite architecture school.
Yeah. So after you graduated, back in the Penske truck, back to Utah.
Yes. So at the time, at the time in 2007, so the economy was doing pretty good. So we figured, okay, we can get a job anywhere. So where do we want to live? And my
Yeah.
wife and we talked for a long time, trying to think about what the positives and negatives of different areas of the country were. And eventually we're just like, you know what? We love skiing.
Hmm.
We love hiking. How about being a place where you can do those things on the same day as you're working?
Yeah.
And Salt Lake City is basically the only place in the country where you can actually go to the office and also go skiing the same day.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
So, and that's what I do. I mean, like during ski season, usually first thing in the morning, I'll head on up the mountain, go skiing at Solitude or Alta, or one of those resorts up there.
Hmm.
And then by lunchtime, I'm off the slopes. I'm back at the office and getting getting work done.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a great work day.
It is, and as I call it, my Alta conference room. So I even take conference calls while I'm on the mountain. But I do have to be careful. Sometimes, like the wind noise gets a little bit much, so
Yeah.
I have to pull off into a gladed run and maybe like just hide behind a tree for a little bit, just to shield from the wind, and
Right.
you know
Right.
And sometimes people will catch the wind noise and be like, Dave, are you skiing again? I'm like, yeah.
All right. So you moved back to Utah. You've worked for a few different firms at first, and then you
Mhm.
created one of your own. What was it like, the different firms you worked for, and what did you learn at each different one?
Yeah, so my first firm after going to Virginia Tech was Architectural Nexus. They're based in Salt Lake City. They actually have a Sacramento, California office as well. I
Okay,
worked there
close
for
to me.
about I worked there for about 5 years. Um, got a lot of really good training from my mentor, who was a principal there at the time. He's now moved on to another firm, but it was a good experience for me. And then they then the NSA data center, when it was being uh, designed for here in Utah, I was on the design team for that, and the principal in charge of the project assigned me to be the quality control person because with Corps of Engineer projects, you're required to have a person who's specifically assigned to be the QA/QC, but
Hmm.
they can't actually do any of the design work. Well,
Interesting. Okay.
unfortunately, there just wasn't enough QA/QC work to keep me fully busy all the
Mm-hmm.
time. So I spent a lot of time working on CAD standards or Revit standards at the time. It was a Revit office, and just to fill the time, because I'm like, what else am I going to do? I talked to the principal, asked him for additional projects, and he said, no, we need to make sure that you're 100% available anytime we need you for the data center project. I'm like, okay, but my productivity numbers are falling because of it. Well, that came back to be prescient because
Mm-hmm.
when a round of layoffs came off and they laid off 10% of the workforce at the firm because my productivity numbers were below the line,
Yeah.
I was axed. So so that's when I was desperately searching for other work, and um, during that time period, was when I decided to start my business because I figured, okay, I'm licensed now. I guess I can do this. And I had a friend bring me a project. And so I figured, okay, well, I'll at least do this while I'm trying to find another job. And um, ended up actually getting another job in the meantime, kept the business running during that because it was like maybe a few hours a week. So it
Right.
wasn't anything worth bothering about. Went to work for FFKR Architects in Salt Lake City as well. Um, did a lot of car dealerships um, and movie theaters, and then eventually some temples for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints.
Mm-hmm.
Helped out on the Philadelphia Temple, which was that was an amazing project, but uh, the team was so large that I got assigned ceilings. So literally for 4 months, I was drawing nothing but ceiling, crown molding details and stuff.
Wow.
So it was like it was a big, and so it's funny when I tell people who are members of the church, that I was on that team, they get all excited. They're like, "Oh, that's such a beautiful temple. You must have had such a great time." I'm like, "Actually, I hated that project. It was horrible. It was so boring."
But the crown moldings are really nice.
Oh yeah, yeah. I yeah. We went and toured it when the construction was complete as a family, because of course my mom was thrilled because she's like, my son designed it.
Right,
Like,
right.
so we go tour through it, and as I'm walking through, I'm looking. Everybody else is looking around at like the carpet, the walls and stuff, and
Yeah.
I'm just staring at the ceilings, like, yeah, I remember that detail. Yep, I remember that detail. Oh boy, do I remember that detail.
Well, you had a part in
So
it. You had a part in it.
yeah, I had a part in it, and it did turn out really beautifully, and it was a great team to work with. It was just, yeah, it was just a bit mind numbing. That was the only problem.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but
Interesting.
yeah, shortly after that, I started getting more and more projects on the side. I talked to my boss at the time about it, and I'm just like, hey, I like this job. I'm willing to bring these projects in. And they're like, yeah, but we're not interested in those projects. They're not in our wheelhouse. And so I think you're just going to need to make your choice. Like, do you want to be in business for yourself, or do you want to, be here?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to take the leap. And so I did. And, obviously, we struggled a bit, it was tough in general with, having gotten employed shortly before the Great Recession. And
Yeah.
then, of course, as we're coming out of the recession, here I am taking the leap and quitting my job to go full time with my business. So it was like it was a very risky financial choice, but it ended up working out. Ended up making um, getting some decent projects. And I never really had to market. That was the weird part. It
Mm-hmm.
just people would keep just bringing me projects,
Nice.
which on the flip side, it meant that I wasn't really choosing my market segment. It was just what came.
Yeah.
So I ended up doing a lot of industrial flex spaces and like little crappy home additions,
Yeah.
scabbed onto a 1970s split level house.
Sure.
So, I'm sure we've all done stuff like that, because who hasn't had a client with a split level house who wants an addition, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Just, especially here in Utah, it's like they grow like they grow like poppies in the field. You know,
Okay. Interesting.
the split level houses are everywhere. So,
So how long
but
did you continue working for yourself?
so yeah, so I was working for a few years at that, and then eventually had enough work that I um, hired on a drafter, and then hired on a second drafter, and got to the point where we were four of us,
Mm-hmm.
but unfortunately things didn't quite work out well enough. I didn't read the tea leaves right, and fire them when I should have.
Mm-hmm.
Kept paying them, and ended up going, fairly deep into debt paying their salaries,
Uh-huh.
thinking that, I have all these projects, they're going to pay. And this developer client that I had totally stiffed me. They just
Oh.
ghosted totally. And um, so I was left holding the bag, and ended up having to drop fire all my employees and close up shop. So I moved the business back home, and just started the process of recovery. And one of my clients that was not only aware of this problem, because it'd become an issue on one of their projects, where their project was delayed because of this financial trouble,
Mm-hmm.
having to fire the workers, right?
Yeah.
um, they called me up in February. Well, no, actually, they hired me to do a large apartment project for them in November of 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And then in February, they called me up while I'm on the ski slopes, and they're like, "Dave, I want to offer you a job." And
Mm.
at the time, I was thinking, yeah, but I love my freedom. I love the fact that running my business out of my house. I was actually finding ways to be a lot more efficient with the software, with the computers, and just getting to where I realized I didn't need the employees, necessarily. I could get a lot of the work done. I just had to work extra hours,
Mm-hmm.
but it was worth it to not have that stress of making sure that I was getting somebody's paycheck paid.
Yeah.
It was just something I really didn't like, having to do that. It wasn't that I didn't want to. It was that it was a constant struggle to keep up with the payroll.
Yeah.
Because cash flow, as you might know, if running a business, it's like you don't have you don't always have the money coming in from clients at the same time that you need to make payroll.
Right.
And so you need that line of credit in order to make the payroll, right? So anyways, he offers me the job, and I think about it a bit, and I, I eventually come to the decision, you know what? Why not? This sounds like it sounds like it would be a really good thing to have a good solid regular paycheck. And I even talked to some of my other clients and said, "Hey, if I accept this job, obviously I'm not going to be able to service you in quite the same way." They're like, "Sounds to me like this is a really good opportunity for you, Dave. You need to take it."
Yeah.
And so, like, even coming from a client, it was like, yeah, I was like, wow, that's impressive that they cared enough about me to, you know, you know, have my best interest. So it actually worked out great because my first day of work was um, in March of 2020. Signed all the HR stuff, and then I went skiing. Um, very next day, everything locked down due to COVID. So for
Right.
the next several months, here I am working from home, but drawing a paycheck.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm like, so wait, before I was working from home, now I'm still working from home, but now I've got a paycheck
Yeah.
and I don't have to worry about whether or not clients are paying me on time
Yeah.
so that I can make my mortgage payments, right?
Yeah.
And so it was actually like just a wonderful blessing for me. And so I'm really grateful to my employer. They've also been very flexible with allowing me to sort through the working through the existing projects that I had, and you know just balancing my time and everything. So
Yeah.
it's been a really good relationship. And as we've gotten further, I think we've got some really exciting things coming down the pike that we're developing, because part of the job is heading up the modular accessory dwelling unit business, the architectural side of it, and making sure that our plan sets are good and that we do the site specific ones for AHJ approvals. But the other side of the business was to start up a commercial development company. And so that's one of the things that we're doing, is developing apartment projects. And it's just so much fun. I've never had so much fun.
That's great. Well, you've had a pretty amazing architectural journey that you've shared with us.
It's definitely not what I imagined when I went into architecture school. I always thought it was going to be, you go into the firm, you work diligently at the firm, and then someday you get the tap and you're like, okay, we want to make you a partner, like
Yeah.
that kind of thing. No, for me, it was never like that. No.
So your vision of what maybe when you were playing with Legos, or I should say maybe not that far back, but when you're working through architecture school, you had a vision of what the profession would be like, and it certainly hasn't turned out that way.
No. And honestly, I never really fit into, like, I never really fit into the firms anyways. Um, I've always been a bit of a rebel. It's just, I'm just like the way my mind thinks, I don't fit into bureaucratic structures. And anytime you have more than three people in an office, there's a bureaucracy,
Yeah.
so to speak. Um, and especially at some of the larger firms, there's a lot of jockeying for power. There's a lot of backstabbing that goes on. I was completely oblivious to it when I was working at Nexus, for example. Um, and my wife kept on saying, "Dave, you realize they're backstabbing you?" I'm like, "What? What are you talking about?" Like, yeah, some of your coworkers, they're they're stabbing you in the back. I'm like, "What?" And
Wow.
like, and to me, it just didn't process, because that's just not the way I think. I don't think about like power, or like I have absolutely no desire to have any power or control over anybody. I don't want to I don't care about like hierarchical systems. I'm just like, no, I do my work, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, yeah, in larger firms, you're going to have some people who try to take advantage of others, and they'll jockey and they'll position, they'll kiss butt and stuff, and try to position themselves. And I'm just not that kind of person. I'll out and out tell somebody, that their idea is stupid,
Yeah.
because it's like I'd rather be honest than to be, you know, um, what's the word, two faced.
Yeah. Well, David, I appreciate you sharing that with us and sharing your experience and passion for what you do. Let's take a short break, and after we'll explore your experience with the Mac and Apple products.
Okay, thanks.
Architects, how do you manage your firm? Are you using dated and clunky software? Are you frustrated using different spreadsheets and never really getting a clear view of the status of your projects? Then let me tell you about Monograph, because they can help. Monograph is online software that is designed by architects for architects. It allows you to track your time, your projects, and your budgets. It can not only track all of this, but it can do it all in real time. Monograph has an awesome tool called Money Gantt. With it, you can immediately see whether you are under or over budget on a project. Monograph also comes with a tool called Resource, which allows you to reallocate your team's time and track its impact on your remaining budget. Using this powerful tool, you can easily adjust your projects on a week-to-week basis. Can your dated and clunky software do that? Monograph makes this easy. Check out all the ways Monograph can help your firm be more productive at monograph.com and be proactive with Monograph. Welcome back. Well, David, you've shared your professional journey. Now let's discuss how you started using a Mac and other Apple products. How were you first exposed to the Mac?
Okay, so my first exposure to Apple in general was in elementary school with the Apple IIe, the green screens, playing
Yeah.
Oregon Trail, of course. But the first time I ever used a Macintosh, in middle school, I had a good friend. He and his family had immigrated from Bangladesh,
Mm-hmm.
and really smart kid. And we got along great because we both loved Star Trek, and so we were like, just nerding out over all that stuff. And he actually had the Star Trek Enterprise E technical manual. I
Uh-huh.
guess somebody had published that book years ago when the Next Generation was on air, and so we would pour through that manual. We'd be theorizing about how you do warp drive and stuff. And true to his form, he actually ended up going to MIT studying theoretical physics. So he was an awesome person to be friends with. But and it's funny because someone that smart has trouble making friends. And
Uh-huh.
but for me, I obviously gravitated towards him because I saw, hey, I can actually have a smart discussion and not talk about football. I mean, it's
Uh-huh.
nothing wrong with football, but it's like, I, it's like, okay, great. Okay. Man carries ball. Okay. Wonderful. What's this about? What's this about warp drive theory? It's like, that's something that's way more interesting to me. So he had the classic Mac, the original, right?
Yeah.
And granted, it was already like 10 years old at the time because it was like this is the early 90s. So we're playing around with that, and you know and that was kind of my first introduction to the Apple world. um, Years later, when I was in school, I I I was able to I I was able to buy the titanium app MacBook Pro.
Yeah.
If you remember the titanium one, that was my first Mac that I owned for myself. And I was so excited because it was such a beautiful machine. And just everything about it just got me so excited. And then lines started appearing on the screen. And back then Apple Care was not nearly as good as it is now.
Hmm.
And I called up Apple and they basically gave me the shaft. And like, I was so mad. So like for 3 years, I'm using this laptop with like a pink line going across the screen.
Hmm.
So I was so mad because it was like a $2,000 machine. I was like, like
Yeah.
a college student, I can't afford to, just go out and replace this.
Yeah.
So, and then I switched back to Windows for a while, just because I was so mad at that one line across the screen. I just so I went with a HP and then with a Dell, and um, yeah, started realizing why I didn't like those,
Hmm.
because you had because to get those more higher performing laptops, they would run so hot that you would actually have to like prop it up on like so I'd take like an architect scale and stick it up behind the Dell laptop to prop it up so that there was enough airspace behind it so that you could actually, keep it cool.
Right.
And then I even built like my own lap desk so that I could, keep it off my, because it would like literally burn my lap.
Yeah.
And so finally, when I was just like, I was done with it, and I was like, okay, I need to go back to a MacBook. And so my next MacBook was the late 2016 one that I bought myself, and I was so happy about that. Um, it still runs a little hot because it was the Intel, but it was still way better than any of the Windows ones.
Yeah.
And I used that up until just 2 weeks ago when I picked up this M1 Pro.
Yeah. Now you recently upgraded to the new MacBook Pro, the 2021 model with the M1 Pro processor, I think it was.
Yeah,
So you waited almost 5 years to upgrade. What's been your impression of the new MacBook Pro?
I am in love with it. I am just amazed at how fast and responsive it is. The keyboard is fantastic. The sound is great. The graphics on the screen are stunning. Like I've never seen a screen so good as this. And so, I mean, in general, my only complaint is I didn't get enough RAM. And the only reason why I didn't get enough RAM was I had because of where things were financially, because aforementioned issues with the business debt, right?
Hmm.
Um, I my credit score has not been the greatest, so I don't use credit cards anymore. And so I had to make sure I actually had the cash in the bank. By the time I had the cash in the bank to actually purchase it, the waiting list was already 8 weeks for any of the 32 or 64 gig models.
Hmm.
And so I'm like, you know what? I still want to get it, so I'm going to get it, and I'll just sell it on eBay once I can get the nicer one.
Yeah.
And um, yeah, the RAM limitations are real. Not too bad though. I mean, like I've actually been really surprised because of how fast the swap disk function is.
Hmm.
Because the SSD is just so fast on this, you hardly notice it.
Yeah.
And so the most I've gotten up to was like 20 gigs of a swap file. Um,
Hmm.
but most of the time, I'm not getting into the swap file because most of the models that I'm working with are smaller models. And if I do need to open up a larger model, I just use the iMac Pro that I have at the office.
I see.
So
Okay. So professionally, you are still using a Mac for your current, in your current job?
yeah, for my job, yeah, we have an iMac Pro with 64 gigs of RAM for me to use, and the 16 gig AMD Vega graphics. So
Uh-huh.
it's a fantastic machine, and I'm really excited to see what they do with the iMac Pro next year when they unveil the Apple Silicon version, because I am just if this MacBook Pro is any indication of where they're going with the desktop class professional machines, I, I would think that you'd be stupid to still own any Intel stock at this point. I mean, I and I really hope that Intel actually does catch up and comes with an ARM-based processor that is able to compete.
Hmm.
But man, I just I fear for their existence. I don't think they can survive this.
Well, I think they'll survive just fine. There's certainly plenty of Windows vendors out there that are buying their chips. So the Mac market has never been that huge that I mean they'll certainly take a hit, but
Yeah, I guess what I mean by that is like right now AMD is um, you know you know a good bit ahead of
sure.
Intel on the desktop market and the Windows market. Um, and then obviously even Microsoft is starting to look into doing their own chips
Yeah.
for their Surface devices. Um, I just, like I said, I mean, I want Intel to succeed. I want them to get their house in order because I think it's really important that we have competition in the market. I think it's also really important that we have a native, like a natively American made
Sure.
chip manufacturer. Because I think AMD's Taiwan based, right?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. Yeah,
And
I'm not
and even
sure.
Apple Silicon, if I'm not mistaken, they're made by TMCI, I think, out of
Yeah.
Taiwan.
Yeah, they're
So
made out. Yeah, they're manufactured outside of the United States, although they are
although I
building facilities here in the United States as well. So,
that's what I've heard because I think
yeah.
they're trying to prepare just in case Taiwan gets invaded, and so they're trying to, they're trying to build a backup plan to make sure that they can still have a
Yeah,
place to freely operate without Communist Party interference.
sure, sure. So I'm curious, while you were on your own, because you've mentioned before you worked in Revit and you worked at some other firms that were Windows based, were using a PC yourself for a while. While you were on your own, were you using a PC or a Mac?
So it started out with the PC,
Uh-huh.
and then I transitioned to the Mac over time. The first, like it started out as building out a Hackintosh before I
Hmm.
got the. Um, so I'd been playing around with that for a while on the side, just as kind of like a hobby. Eventually, I was actually able to build a Hackintosh that was just a good solid machine, and that one I still use. It functions great, and I don't feel bad about it because I've spent tens of thousands of dollars with Apple, so they can suck it. I
Understandable.
mean,
Sure.
let's just put it this way. I we've got two iPads, seven iPhones, I three Macintosh, four Macintosh computers in the house. Um, I don't think Apple's suffering
No.
from my one Hackintosh.
Not by the one, certainly.
Yeah, exactly.
So you were using a PC and a Mac. What software were you using while you were on your own?
So when I first came, yeah, when I first started on my business, I used Revit largely just because that's what I had already been using at the previous firms. Um, and then I had a fateful project with one on a home edition project. They wanted they wanted stone veneer,
Hmm.
and I was having a hell of a time getting the stone hatch patterns to actually work in Revit because you have to actually load like the PAT files and all that, and it was just the the client actually was laughing at me like you can't even get a stone pattern to work, and it was on that day I'm like I'm going back to ArchiCAD because ArchiCAD's actually what I used in school because one of my professors, because he saw me using a Mac, he's like, oh, you you should try ArchiCAD.
Hmm.
And so that's when I first tried it. Um, it was in architecture school, and just it was just it just worked well for me. It was like it was something that flowed really well, and Revit was always just so janky. I mean, it always felt off. Like it felt like software programmers trying to force me to think in their way. And the thing I like about ArchiCAD is as any ArchiCAD user who's sufficiently experienced with it can tell you. There's about a million ways to do everything in ArchiCAD, and it all just depends on the method that you like to use.
Hmm.
So you don't. So it gives you a lot more freedom to just kind of think the way you want to and function the way you want to. And granted, if you're in a larger office, I would imagine that an ArchiCAD office, you'd probably have to, bring down the hammer and set standards. But unlike Revit, where like it's literally the software that's handcuffing you and making you think in certain ways.
Hmm.
Whereas ArchiCAD, yeah, it's like I can do it however I want. I can build an object out of a morph. I can build it out of a roof. I can build it out of a wall, a floor. Like I can do like whatever I want. I
Hmm.
can imagine whatever world I want and create it pretty easily.
So, what other applications or services do you use typically on your Mac, especially when you are running your own business?
So um, let's see. Specific to the Mac, um, I don't know if there's anything specific to the Mac that's not also available on
Well,
Windows
whichever. Yeah.
necessarily. So it was never really an issue of needing to be on Mac. It was more just it was always just the comfort level. As I mentioned before, the color blindness, that's not the only eye problems that I have. I also have a little bit of myopia and near and is it farsightedness or nearsightedness? The one where you can't see stuff far away. I always forget.
I think
I
that,
mean,
yeah.
and it's not bad enough to like really, I don't necessarily have to wear glasses.
Hmm.
I'm legal to drive without them, but it's just enough that on Windows machines, especially as I've been aging in the last 5 to 10 years, my eyes have, kind of become a lot less tolerant of the visual shakiness on the screen. You know what I'm
Hmm.
talking about? Like on a Windows, because like one of the things that really annoys me is like when I open up Windows, um, especially if you open it up on a 4K screen. Oh
Hmm.
my goodness, Windows is just a disaster on any high resolution display because it's just everything just squishy, tiny. And the other thing that I don't understand, because it can be the same monitor, and if I hook up a Mac to it, I can read the text fine, everything's clear, there's no visual shakiness with the text. But on a Windows machine, no matter what settings I set, for some reason the text just looks like it's like glimmering and
Yeah.
shaking. And I don't know if that's just the way my eyes are, but like if I don't have the Retina display, if I don't have the Mac OS running on it, um, it hurts my eyes. So I can use a Windows machine for a little while, but it starts to just hurt after a while. I even ended up getting some glasses with an anti-glare coating. That's helped a little bit, but even then, I'm way better off if I'm using a Mac with a
Yeah.
Retina display. I can last throughout the day and get my work done, and it doesn't hurt my eyes at all.
Yeah.
But on a Windows machine, I'm like an hour in, and I'll be like wanting to take a sledgehammer to the computer. So
Not a good thing.
yeah, exactly. And I do keep one Windows machine just so that I can run Lumion and also occasionally there's some functions that you can't do on a Mac.
Hmm.
Like for example, the Google Earth import using RenderDoc. That was one of my that was actually my first ArchiCAD tutorial was illustrating how you can do that. Um, and that because RenderDoc only runs on a Windows machine, you know, it's just so it's always helpful to have a Windows machine in the house just for
Hmm.
that purpose. And also, my boys like to game, so
Yeah. So I'm curious, what other sort of maybe time tracking or accounting project management apps were you using?
so mostly just software as a service type stuff online. So QuickBooks Online, and for time tracking, I'm using Harvest app,
Hmm.
which yeah, that's a nice little handy tracker. it's like $12 a month for a single person, for a single user, and you get to, it's just a really nice, handy way. And and this was something nice I found when I got the M1, the Apple Silicon Mac. The Harvest app, the widget is already Apple Silicon, and it just docks into the status bar up at the top.
Oh, nice.
So you can just click up there and start and stop your time. It's
Yeah.
great. It's because before on the Intel version, for some reason it wouldn't allow you to do that.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
yeah.
So what apps and equipment do you use to produce your Colorblind Architect video blog?
So I started out with iMovie, of course, and the camera has mostly just been my iPhone.
Uh-huh.
Um, when I upgraded to the 12 Pro, this this has been amazing. The camera on this is so much better. Like I remember going from the seven plus to the 12 Pro, and it was like instantly the video quality was like night and day better. I mean, it
Hmm.
was just amazing. And then recently, I picked up a GoPro Hero 10 because I do also like to do hiking and skiing videos. And granted, they're kind of corny, dumb, but it's just a hobby that I enjoy. It's like I've always loved making movies, and
Hmm.
it's another creative outlet that allows me to you know have have an additional level of fun with my interaction with the two sports I love, hiking and skiing. So I try to do those occasionally, and sometimes I mix in some political commentary just because like it, I don't know. I feel like we all need to speak honestly about our opinions. I don't like the whole I don't like the whole thing about people being quiet. Like honestly, if somebody's politically opposed to what I believe, I want them to be speaking openly and honest about it because I want them to be also able to hear me speak open and honest about my ideas because I figure, you know what, if we're all talking openly and honest about our ideas, there's a chance, just a chance that maybe you think it causes you to think about something that you didn't think about before, and you realize, oh, my worldview was slightly off. I need to make a slight adjustment because we all need to constantly improve our thinking over the course of our lives. I mean, because none of us is perfect, um, and that's one of the things. And I don't mean to get religious, but I mean that's one of the reasons why I still believe in redemption through Jesus Christ because I figure I know I fall all the time. I screw up all the time. And I believe everybody does. And I believe everybody deserves forgiveness. I think everybody deserves a chance to um, make amends and have those old things forgotten. Because, it's like otherwise, I mean, imagine if you were permanently punished for something that you say for the rest of your life, even if it was something that was kind of like you just stupidly said it, you thought it was like maybe a funny joke, or maybe you just were angry at the time, or maybe it was just you weren't fully informed on something. And just imagine if like then the Twitter mobs turn on you and you get canceled, so to speak, like that one lady, like what was it, Jennifer Sacco years ago? Like she made that joke while she was on flight, right before she hopped on the flight to Africa because she was doing some, I think she was doing some service work, and while she was on the plane, she the Twitter storm like went got all crazy, and when she landed, her boss called her and fired her, and it's like that no that's not right. It's like she should have a chance to be able to say, look, it's a stupid joke, I'm sorry for the joke, I thought for some reason in my mind it was funny at the time, and you know yeah, on second thought, yeah, it was maybe in poor taste. you shouldn't be canceled just because of a stupid joke. And I think people need to chill out and just recognize, hey, we're all imperfect. We're all sinful wretches of people, and we all need forgiveness. And I guess that's kind of the political point that I continually make in a lot of my political commentary videos. And I'm not trying to offend anybody. I want people to think differently. And I want them to actually come back and, argue with me if they feel like I'm saying something that's wrong, because I want to respond and say, okay, well, here, you're right on this, or, hey, I disagree with you on that, but hey, we can still be friends. Because like I said, I do work with everybody.
Well, a lot like you gave Apple a second chance after they had that pink line across your PowerBook G4 for several years.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, and frankly, I'll always be a forgiving person, because yeah.
So, what are some of the favorite things you like about using a Mac and other Apple devices?
Retina display is number one. That's absolutely the most important thing to me. The other part is just it just flows like it's I'm still amazed, because I just tried out the Windows 11 on Parallels, and just because I was curious to see what it was like. It's still an ungodly mess. I mean, like, you go into this. I just don't understand why Microsoft can't figure this out. It's like, look, Apple makes it easy. All the settings are in the settings app, and they're all under a predictable flow, like it's a uniform design language. So everything's like, what to expect when you're going into the different settings dialogues and how they're supposed to operate. But Windows, they still have settings dialogues from Windows 95 buried deep within there. And you're just like,
yeah.
I like, can you finish your homework, Junior? I mean, you seem like you seem like you're trying to half-ass your way through it.
Yeah. Can you share one app, utility, or service that you find most useful?
One app or service that I find most useful, probably ever since Bluebeam ceased supporting the Mac. I had to scramble for something that would allow me to put stamps on PDFs, specifically for submittal reviews. You want to be able to stamp the submittal reviews and stuff. So I found PDF Expert. It's about, I think it's $80 for a perpetual license.
Yeah, sounds about right.
And it's great. It runs just as smooth and quick as the preview app does, but it gives you those added tools of, like your regular Bluebeam type tools of being able to add stamps and stuff like that, which for me, that's really all I need. I don't need anything super fancy with the PDF, just the stamps and the ability to mark it up red line. So
yeah.
Plus they have a nice iPad version, which works great with the pencil. The Bluebeam app on the iPad always sucked horribly, because it would always be choppy, it wouldn't translate. Even with the Apple Pencil, you'd be like, Bluebeam, what are you doing here? It's like you're stuck in the 2000s. Come on, this is the 2020s.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And before we move to our final part of the show, let's take a quick break, and after we'll wrap up with the 10 questions.
Okay.
As business owners and architects, how often do we think about our IT provider? Typically, only when things go wrong. For many of us, unfortunately, this happens too often, especially with the latest emphasis on remote work. I know I've had to deal with my fair share of IT fire drills. It's not a pleasant experience, and clearly I wasn't dealing with an IT provider like ArcIT. ArcIT is a different kind of company. They specialize in serving Mac and PC-based architecture and design firms. This means they understand your Mac-related challenges of keeping your personal and your business data separate, and have experience providing solutions when certain software providers stop supporting Mac OS. Combine this with industry-leading response times, proactive remote hardware management, solid disaster recovery and backup solutions, and enterprise-grade security management. And yet, all of the above are just table stakes for a solid IT company. Arc IT goes a step further. They become your strategic partner when it comes to planning, budgeting, and integrating new technology into your business. All of this sounds expensive, right? Not with Arc IT. Because Arc IT is highly specialized for our industry, their pricing is on par, or in some cases, even lower than other IT providers. Arc IT is transparent and publishes its pricing on its website. Your business deserves a competent, responsive, and proactive IT partner. Reach out to Boris, Arc IT's founder and CEO, for a free consultation. Go to getarcit.com and click Work with Us. David, I appreciate you sharing your architectural and Mac journey with us. Now let's get to our final segment, the 10 questions. And the first question is, what is your favorite word?
My favorite word. That's a tough one. Probably kamangha-mangha, just because it's fun to say. It's a Filipino word. It comes from the Tagalog language, and it literally translates as marvelous. Kamangha-mangha. It's just fun to say.
What's your least favorite word?
Taxes.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
I know this is probably meant as like a short, quick answer, type of question, but to be quite honest, this is something I've thought a lot about, over the years, and I've found to keep myself, creatively strong. Exercise is one of the biggest things. Going out for a run, going skiing, taking a hike, whatever it is that gets the juices flowing, gets the body moving. There's something about that frees the mind and allows you to think more clearly. And when I do that, a lot of times, whatever creative problem or challenge I'm going through, a lot of times the answer will actually pop up in my head while I'm out on a run. Like I'll literally, oh, and then when I get back, I'm like racing to try to draw it so I could like capture that mental image that popped up. And a lot of times those moments are the ones where some of my better ideas come from. The one exception to that, I would say, that one time I was designing a mosque for my Muslim client that I was mentioning earlier. They were building a mosque for their congregation of like Kuwaiti expats here in Utah,
Mm-hmm.
and so as we were going through the design process, a lot of times I'd have my iPad with me in church on Sunday, and in the middle of services, like these ideas would pop up into my head, and I'd sketch them out on Morpholio on the iPad. And those ended up being the ideas that actually drove the design and actually turned it into a really cool project. And it's one of those things where it was like, it was never meant to be, I don't think it was ever meant to be anything super fancy or anything like that. And the budget was really tight because, here they were, like, it's a pretty small community, and they had to buy an old massage parlor and convert that into a mosque because that's what they could afford on the budget that they had for their project. And we were able to do some things creatively with the designs that came up to me, like while I was in church, that and it was like, that was the only time that's ever happened, because every other project I've ever worked on, it's always like on the exercise. But for that one specific one, and I think it was because it was more of a spiritually based project, it was more focused on helping to bring people to God, that I think that's where being in that mode of thinking, also in a similar situation, even though, obviously as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we don't segregate male and female. We sit together, and
Yeah.
it's a bit different, obviously, but it was just interesting to me that connection was made there. And I don't know, that was probably way longer of an answer than you were wanting.
That's okay. I appreciate you sharing.
Yeah.
What turns you off?
What turns me off? Um, Generally speaking, the aforementioned cancel culture really bothers me. I get really bothered by um, people thinking that communism is a good idea. Um, it bothers me a lot that people don't do the research. They don't study the history. My wife grew up in Romania, so for us, um, it's a very sensitive subject, and so it kind of actually it's almost more of a trigger than a turn off, but like actually gets me angry when I see people wearing Che Guevara t-shirts or CCCP t-shirts, and it's just like, dude, you don't know what the hell you're talking about wearing that shirt. And you are offending everybody who has suffered under those despotic regimes, who terrorize and brutally just, like, abused millions of people and killed millions of people. And so it's like, that's one of my biggest turn offs.
What sound or noise do you love?
Probably, well, it's a combination. I love I love beautiful music. Um, so a really good song can just make my day like so much happier. I especially love the piano guys. If you've ever watched any of their YouTube videos, they're just fantastic, and they just have such a great sound. Um, but I also love really good classical music. But I also like to jam out to some Metallica occasionally. So I'm all over the place. I mean, like, musically, and then but probably one of my favorite sounds is like, when you're on a hike and you're in the mountains and you stop for a moment and you just sit there and listen, and there's that subtle rustling of the leaves
Mm-hmm.
and the occasional bird chirp. That's that's my favorite.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Um, Anytime any politician starts talking, yeah, but like, probably the one that actually physically like causes convulsions would be like any kind of really high screeching noise, like fingernails on the chalkboard.
What's your favorite curse word?
Oh, this is always a tough one. Um, but I'm probably just going to go with the probably. Let's just go with ass, because that's biblical. It's safe. My kids don't want. I'm not allowed to say it in front of my kids, but it's probably the most culturally acceptable, and it's I don't know. It means donkey, and donkeys are actually kind of a cool animal.
Okay. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Well, I think I'm kind of doing that right now. Attempting developing. Um, when I was one of my favorite video games growing up was SimCity, and I always wanted to, you know, drive the development of things, build out things. And as an architect, it's a lot of fun, but you're not making the choices. It's your client that's making the choices. You're kind of just helping them make the choices. But as a developer architect, the fun thing about being at the job that I'm at is I actually get to see the parcels when we first find them as available pieces of land, and go, you know what would look good there?
Mm.
And that's Oh, it's so much fun. I mean, just the world that you get to imagine. It's fun.
What profession would you not like to do?
Anything in the medical professions. I I mean, I've designed enough medical and dental facilities to know that I would not be happy in those professions. So, although I do like designing them, I just I don't like the idea of having to like touch people's insides.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
That one's easy. Well done, thou good and faithful servant.
Excellent. David, I'd like to thank you for joining me on this episode of Inside the Apple Studio. Please let the listeners know where they can find you online and the best way to contact you.
Yeah, so the aforementioned Colorblind Architect on YouTube. I do also have that on Rumble, but yeah, primarily YouTube's the way to find that. And then if you are on Facebook, I do have a Colorblind Architect page. It's open for anybody to follow and send in messages, and so I'd be happy to interact with people and discuss ideas with them. And definitely, if anybody out there is interested in maybe coming on my YouTube channel sometime for a conversation, I'd love to do that too. I've never done an interview show other than this one and my brother-in-law's podcast channel, which his podcast channel is called Elders Rising, but it's a little bit more specific to members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Specifically, we call our adult men in the church elders, and kind of like the missionaries that they're going around, they wear the tag elder. So that title doesn't go away in the church when you finish up with your mission. You just are no longer referred to as elder, but you're still part of the elders quorum, so to speak. So the idea of their podcast is to, it's kind of like a call to arms spiritually, saying, come on, people, wake up, stop sleeping. We need to stand up and speak truth and make sure that we're fighting for righteousness and goodness, which I know sounds kind of religious. And if you have any atheist viewers, I'm not trying to turn people off like that. I'm happy. I happily discuss with atheists just as well, because I mean, I totally understand where they're coming from. I just know what I've felt, what I've experienced spiritually in my life, and I can't deny the existence of God. And so, while scientifically I can say, yeah, that's kind of weird, a belief in God. But it's like I can't deny it. So it's like at the same time, it's like, yeah.
Well, David, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your passions about what you believe in. It's been an interesting conversation. I appreciate you sharing.
Oh, thank you, Neil.
Thank you for listening to Inside the Apple Studio. I'd like to thank Monograph and ARC IT for their support. You can also support the show by telling a friend and show them how to follow it in their favorite podcast player. If you have comments on the show, you can find me on Twitter at NPANN or at Apple for Arc. That's Apple, FORARCH. You can also comment on the Apple for Architects Facebook page and join the Apple for Architects Facebook group. Inside the Apple Studio is a production of Apple for Architects at appleforarchitects.com. So I'm curious, what other sort of, let me know when you're ready.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out, why is it? Oh, there we go. Because it had me on the big screen, and I was like, oh, that's disturbing. I don't want to be talking to myself.
Right.
That's what I do on my YouTube videos.